Okay. Hello, everyone in the, oh, there's people waiting. So hopefully all of you out there, oh yeah, you got to mute. We're bombing our own broadcast, so it looks like there's a lot because we're all triple joining. But we're testing the link to make sure everyone can get in. So welcome everyone, and I think all you students out there, thank you. Okay, so it worked. Okay, you can log out now. Okay, so now we know there's nothing wrong with the link. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We have another one of our lectures for the Notre Dame de Paris Truss project. Today we have Dr. Gunnar Lucko, who's a professor from the engineering school. He is an ordinary professor of civil engineering, and he is the director of its construction engineering and management program. So we're excited for him to share with us his expertise. And I know you guys have a lot of questions already. So we've already dug into the truss, the shape, and we're just taking it at face value that they work. So we're looking forward to your thoughts. And I'll turn it over to you right away. And you can walk.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good noon. More audience participation. You're all here. I can't see or hear many people online, but I know you're there. Greetings to you. But let's have a warm hello. Hello. All right, very good, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to walk with you through the very, very practical aspects of this. Let me look at the display here, single page view. Full screen mode. There we go. Oh, I need to screen share? Yes, of course. I should have learned this after a year now, shouldn't I? Okay, share screen. We are sharing our screen happily. And now we are going to our display mode, wherever that is. Here we go. All right. I hope everybody now can see my cover slide. And so there it is. I am keeping it as practical as possible. And that is for several reasons. Number one, I'm just a civil engineer. You know, I'm not a designer. I'm not an architect, although I have friends who are architects, or so they say. And the second thing is I like to keep things in a way that we can all understand whatever our backgrounds are. So I distilled from the brief that Tonya gave me, I distilled that I today will talk about how to build a truss for real, all right? And I hope this will be an interesting and new perspective on things. I should say two introductory remarks. Obviously, my accent is not from here. I'm from Germany originally. And Germany is a country without any humor, all right? So I will not make any attempts at such. Any such outbursts will be completely involuntarily and only exist in your mind. The second thing I should say is, since I'm German, which has a long history, my city of Hamburg, Germany is founded in the year 800 something, because there's a record that Vikings burned it down in 832, so go Vikings. I have a long interest in European history, and my civil engineering education, both in Germany and here, shaped that I'm particularly interested in how to build stuff, and how to build cathedrals is a very much big component of that. So today I will talk about a few things. First one is who built cathedrals, and not just the people, but also the leaders of building a cathedral. We'll get a bit familiar with what on earth are master builders, and yes, that's the full word for it. We'll look a little bit about geometry of things. We'll look at what civil engineers call the means and methods. You could call that the way to do things and the stuff you need for it, okay? The means and methods, in other words, your resources and how to deploy them. And there's a couple of subspecialties that we will look at, mostly in terms of tools, because Lorenzo, this is all for you. We will look at tools that some of which you may have in your shop, only the newer versions of it, some of which you have in your shop and, you know, have an version that has never changed over history, and some of which you really want in your shop after this presentation, all right? And then we will have two case studies. One is Cologne in Germany, and the other one is Guédelon in France. And it will become very apparent why I picked these two case studies. All right? So, everybody ready? Yes. Very good. Okay. Master builders is our ancestors, and our, I mean civil engineers plus architects. Master builders were us before the professions split. And they split during the Industrial Revolution, roughly said, because there was, in the Renaissance, people developed these whole skills in fortress building. That was military engineering, right? And civil engineers became the profession that was tasked with building all the things that were not fortresses and such. And architecture branched off in the other direction of design. I know I speak very simplifyingly here, but we used to be one profession, and it certainly was one back then. It was an awesome responsibility. The master builders of European cathedrals had responsibility for all of the architectural design, all of the financial planning, fundraising, and budget administration, all of the materials selection and procurement and delivery and storage and installation, and all of the hiring and training. Well, training, not all of it, because there was a strong system of crafts and craft training within each particular craft, but hiring all the workers, and on top of that, devising methods such as the ones that we're looking at today. So you can think of this as three people in one: a project manager, a civil engineer, and an architect rolled in one person. There you go. I think by now we're getting rather impressed at what these people did before any computers were conceived. Now, in terms of the education, they were not uneducated by any means. They were very, very, very educated for their times. For once, they had a system of apprenticeships that they went through. These apprenticeships lasted from 5 years, sometimes 7 years, where they were essentially a, more or less, you could call it an indentured servant to the master of the craft. This was all organized through guilds, who taught them, and in return, they had to obey orders. They were given food and lodging and clothing, and in their last years of their apprenticeship, as they approached being a journeyman, they got a little bit of pay, often which they used to buy some of their own tools. After that, they would typically travel and to other cities, to other countries even, to refine their skills. This is, by the way, how the Gothic style spread. They traveled around Europe and they saw these things and they brought these ideas and made them their own and made them even better. This is how Gothic style arrived in northern Germany from France, for example. And northern Germany made a very strange regional variety because we have a lot of sand and clay soils at the coast. Northern Germany has a variety called brick Gothic. Take a look at it. It's very unusual, very distinctive, and completely different from what the French people did, but it's both Gothic. Then they may, if they were lucky, and this still exists. This still exists. The whole apprenticeship system exists in Germany and some other European countries as well, of course. Not in this country, sadly. And the journeyman traveling, that still exists. If you ever go to Germany and you drive over rural highways and you see folks that wear a black vest, black pants with flaring bell-shaped bottoms and a big hat, and they look like sort of a person from the 1700s, those are traveling carpenters. They still do this. A few of them, but it's still a tradition. They travel around, people know they're educated, their quality, they're hired, and that is part of their training, and they're not allowed to get within 50 miles of their home for 2 years, and they go out, survive, and they're better crafts professional afterwards. Okay? And after that, they would, with luck, be hired as an assistant on some existing cathedral project somewhere. And if they were lucky, like a once-in-a-lifetime chance, there may have been a search for a master builder, one person, of the cathedral who was appointed by the chapter, the clergy administrative council, for that cathedral to be built and say, you are now our master builder, and that was a lifetime position, okay? So education, I would say, it's not anywhere too far removed from what we do today, in particular in your architecture program. Now, the time horizon was very, very different. That's something that came out clearly when I rated my history books in my collection at home. They were not thinking today, tomorrow, next week. They were thinking in seasons, and they were thinking in generations, and they knew full well that if you started building a cathedral and you were in charge of, say, digging the foundations, your grandchildren would see it finished. You would not see the fruits of your own project in your lifetime. It was a more humble, more long-term view, and they built quite literally for eternity. And I'm going to refrain from comments about a recent civil engineering disaster here that all of us have spit out our coffee when we woke up that morning. The second thing is that they were building things with a very, very, very different mentality. And I actually learned that from a blacksmith. I've done quite a few woodworking courses, which I loved. I've done a blacksmith course, which I hated. Because, and I'll tell you why, the thing that makes blacksmithing so different from my modern mindset is what I characterize as, I thought it was all the cool, you know, hammering around on hot steel, you know, blazing hot and shaping it and hammering. And I found out in my blacksmithing course, no, that's 10% of what you do. You know what's the 90% of what you do? You're filing it. You're filing it to make pieces fit. And filing steel with files is about as interesting as grating cheese. And it is about 10 times more annoying because it screeches in my ear. So blacksmithing, not for me. But what I learned that day is that they were not standardizing elements. They were making things to fit. They were either making any two pieces, and that goes for lumber as well, not just for metals. They were making one piece to fit the next piece that it needs to fit to. And if they wanted to replicate things, they were using templates. They were using full-scale wooden templates. And finally, they would test fit. They would put things together while they were shaping them and see if they fit on the ground, because up there, you can't adjust very easily. All right? Good. So next, a little bit of geometry. I looked at way too much of this, and this is sort of a little advertising for myself. We will look at a whole lot more of this in 2 years in Oxford, because I'm very proud to say that in 2023, I will host the Oxford Summer Seminar, where we will look at the history of geometry in all professions and what immense contributions that has made. These folks were not the people that pulled out the metric measurement tape. Here, mine just fell apart punctually for arrival at the lecture. They were not doing this, that they were pulling out their measurement tape and says, oh, this needs to be 16 3/4 inches. They had basic units, they had inches and feet and all that. But more importantly, they were thinking in terms of proportions. And they said, you know, if this window needs to be this wide, then we divide it in half or thirds for the stiles and muntins and whatnot. And that is the way they thought. And they were fully aware and understanding of the classical orders, all your architecture 101 history that you learned, and that I think we civil engineers should learn, because it's the basic for our Western civilization in the building industry. Now, how did they design things? They had two ways of doing this. The first one was sample manuals. Think of it as glorified sketch pads, dictionaries, secrets of the trades drawn out and written down. They had extensive notebooks, a few of which have survived that we can see. And they had what is called a tracing floor, which is an area such as this, where they would either with chalk or coal or awls scratch onto the floor the shape that they were building, particularly for your stonemasonry, but also for your timber framing. Okay, so you had here you see a bit of everything. So on the top left, you see the well, how should I say that? The reproduction of lines that archaeologists have found on an existing tracing floor. And these tracing floors could be either in the basement or in the attic of the cathedrals, because you had a large open empty space where there was nothing until the building was in use. And so a few tracing floors still exist. Super interesting stuff. You can see how they literally lined out things with pieces of string and with big compasses, full size. On the right-hand side, it's not the same, but it's another example, is an actual photo that had very good contrast. So I threw it in there. You can actually see the stone tiles on this tracing floor, right? And on the left, you see a dry fitting on the ground, which is what needs to be done to make sure all pieces fit together. And I've mentioned the templates already. Any comments, thoughts, questions so far already? You can raise your hand. This is not a one-way monologue. I want to be interactive, but I guess this is more a slideshow today than, you know, quiz, question and answer. But please interrupt me if you want. Here is a reproduction of a sample manual. This is, I think, by the gentleman who worked, I think it was the one that worked on Notre Dame. I would have to look this up. It's been a month that I made these slides. And you can see here how it's sort of a Leonardo Da Vinci sort of thing of, you know, the structure, the patterns, the repetition, the order. There you flesh it out and you define how you do all your columns and your flying buttresses and whatnot. And in between, you know, I guess you draft your drafting skills, or, you know, for the foot of a statue or whatever that was. I mean, these were sketch pads and they look like it, which is sort of very human. All right. So how do you lay out stuff in the Middle Ages? There is no CAD, there is no computers, there is no measurement tapes, although they had measurement sticks. But we will talk a lot about tools. So this is all the fun stuff. And I have some of these. I just didn't want to lug a big bag from my to be, you know, kitted out woodworking shop at home. First things is you need an awl. An awl is a scratching point. Think of it as a pencil that is not a pencil. You're just scratching into a surface. Wood works just fine. You can also use a knife. Knife gives a much sharper line, and it scores the fibers, so you can see very, very cleanly where your marking line is. In traditional hand tool woodworking nowadays, you make a knife line, and you carefully color the two sides of that line with a pencil. And then you take your handsaw and you saw to the line, and you're basically splitting the line, meaning you take the one on one side away on your waist side and the other one you let stand. And that is by far the most accurate way of sawing a piece of timber just to the right size, precisely at your marked knife line. Everybody in woodworking needs a pocket knife. It's that simple. Straight edge is just a long, known to be straight piece of wood, typically. I have a few in my collection. Think of your ruler, just larger, but it doesn't have any ruler marks on it. It's just a known piece that is very, very straight. How do you check? Oh, this is a good quiz question. How do you check that a piece of wood is straight? Ha ha. Huh? Well, you can do this. You could look along the length and see, you know, is it straight? And you can look at it this way, but that's not accurate enough. How do you do this? Ha ha.
The ground is flat.
Well, that's for choosing your lumber at the home improvement store, and I do that all the time. By the way, my rule of thumb is you need to go through at least 5 pieces of lumber until you find the 6th piece that is straight enough. You restack your lumber and be nice, restack it all. But I think, you know, if they have 30 pieces, I might get 4 and take them home. Okay, it's that crooked. For carpentry, that's fine. For woodworking, nah. But that's carpentry. We're talking more accurate than that. How can you be really sure that your straight edge is straight? I'll give you a hint. What you do is you put it down, you take your knife and you mark along your straight edge, and then you flip it and lay it down a smidgen next to it and run another knife line. And what you will find is your eye can see deviations of a fraction of a degree. And if those two lines are parallel for the whole 4 to 6 foot length of your straight edge, then your straight edge is true. Okay? You draw it 2 ways, but you basically flip it. You mirror it and see if the mirrored lines are still straight. Okay? Good. Yes, rulers you have mostly, you know, you want a ruler is like what we have nowadays with your feet and inches on it. What is a square? A square is two pieces of lumber. Yes?
Were you saying the straight edge? Those straight edges were like 4 to 6 feet. They were really long.
Straight edges. I mean the woodworking straight edges I have seen are around 4 feet long, but 6 feet is not uncommon. I have a friend who has a woodworking shop now, and he has a very long one. That one is newer. It's made out of metal, but straight edges, you make them as long as you can reasonably handle them, and as long as you can reasonably guarantee they stay straight. Because if it gets too long, it's hard to keep them straight. If they're not straight, what do? You take a wooden plane and plane off a single smooth shaving and test them again until they're straight. Okay? You always reference to another surface, in this case the plane bottom, that you know gives you a precise finish. A square is two pieces of wood in a 90-degree angle fixed to each other permanently, and you test them the same way, right? So you can test for squareness. Now in the field, lugging around a square is a bit awkward, so they had something super ingenious that I should have in my pocket, and I will make myself one, and I forgot. It's a 13-knot rope. What on earth is, you know, they're not superstitious, they're practical. Why 13 knots? The gentleman in the middle. Yes. You see the guy having the 13-knot rope, what's he doing? Yes.
The Pythagorean theorem.
The Pythagorean theorem in its simplest form with the smallest integer numbers is 3, 4, and 5. 3 plus 4 plus 5 is? Actually, it's 12, right? Last time I checked, it's an even number, but you have 13 knots because you need one to connect back to the start, right? All right, so you have a 13-knot rope. You can pull yourself a right angle, which for field applications can be accurate enough, not for doing stone masonry in your shed, okay? Good. Then you have dividers. Dividers and a compass and a sector are all the same family. They're basically two pieces of wood that you can set to any angle, and you can lock to that angle and keep them at that angle. A sector, I can't get into that for the lack of time today, but a sector is a very, very, very clever thing that you will want to learn about. Super interesting topic. It's like an angle measurement device on steroids, where you could say, I want to divide, I want to have a 5-cornered shape, what's that, a hexagon, a pentagon, a heptagon, or whatever. The sector would give you ways to do that, and the sector has ruler divisions on both legs. It would also allow you to easily do proportional scaling up and down. But we don't have time for that, but sector is a really interesting tool that I will add to my woodworking collection, and you should. Next, surveying tools. We're getting a bit bigger. Who's this guy? Does he build cathedrals? Does he build cathedrals? Does he look like he's building a cathedral there? No. He's building a Roman fort somewhere in the forest. Have you ever seen the movie Gladiator? At the beginning of Gladiator, where it's, battle in the forest, Romans versus barbarians. That's where my grandfather was from. That was the Limes, the northernmost border of the Roman Empire. And they built their fortifications. They built their Roman forts with surveying tools like this. First of all, you have a string. String is useful for a million purposes. String is useful to say we string a straight line from here to there. You pull it really tight so it doesn't sag. Next thing is a string with a weight on it. What's the string with a weight on it called? A plumb bob. Why is it called a plumb bob? Because plumbum is Latin for lead, and they put a little lead weight on the string because it was the heaviest, smallest thing that they had in their pocket. Okay? They were very familiar with that. Oh yes, a labella. A labella is this funny triangle-looking thing. A labella is basically a combination of a square and a plumb bob with a very, very precisely marked center line there. The labella is the, get this, your Mr. want to use water for anything, right? A labella is the non-water water level. Okay, this is the water level before people started to use industrial and water levels were only possible through the Industrial Revolution, when you could have little glass vials with a liquid and etched lines. This you can build yourself, and it's almost precise for anything that you need. You have a quadrant, a groma. A groma is what he has there. A groma is basically a way to sight very precise right angles in the field, because you need 4 very precise corners or your Roman fort is all crooked. So he sights basically along this cross with 4 plumb bobs, and that's called a groma. You have merchet, or however you pronounce that, no idea, I just read things. Yes?
Do you have a record of who invented those tools?
I have not a record, but I have an insight. And here's the insight that I'll go to right now. When I researched this, and I had way too much fun researching this, and I hope this comes across today, none of the stuff was new in the Middle Ages. They used technology that was easily at least 1,000, if not 2,000 years old by the times they were built cathedrals. The ancient Greeks had this stuff. The ancient and Egyptians had some of this stuff. The saws were all kind of iffy. The woodworking was sort of, just Pharaoh stone, because they didn't have enough lumber in Egypt. But the ancient Egyptians used dovetails on the sarcophagus. Okay? So the crazy thing is, everything that I'm telling you about is not medieval, it's ancient woodcraft. That was, I think, the most mind-blowing thing that I found out. So all these words are Greek here. Korobatis, that is actually that crazy bench-looking thing, and now you will jubilate, because that is to get a perfectly horizontal horizon. You have the 2 sighting holes at both ends, and then you put water in the indentation in the middle, and you have it's perfectly horizontal. You know what you need that for? Aqueducts. Okay, that's how you do that. And the great thing is, you can build every one of these in the field with the tools like what Lorenzo will throw after you. Okay. Logging. I wanted to give a quick shout out to my woodworking teacher. This is all from his book. And this is all about how the woodworkers have a joke. There's actually a book that's called How to Take a Tree and Build a House and Everything in It. That's not a joke, right? They're serious about this. So we need to at least know what's doing. You have an axe. Everybody know what an axe is? If not, raise your hand. I'll tell you what an axe is. An axe is a wedge on a stick. Okay, that is used to sever fibers, and you see him do that there. He's felling it. You use rollers. Rollers is just a cut-off piece of timber that you can roll a longer log with, right? You have a roller because wheels are way too fancy, right? Who needs wheels? We use rollers. A cant hook. Cant hook we don't have here. I was almost tempted when I went on my last little road trip. They have cant hooks in a few antique stores. A cant hook is basically a spear with a big quarter-circled piece of metal on it. What do you use it? You stick it in the side of a log, and then you lift it, and the log rolls sideways, and that's how you can move heavy pieces of logs. Cant hooks. It looks like you want to go on a zombie apocalypse outfitting mission there. If you so I didn't buy. I almost bought a cant hook at the antique store. It was only $75, and it was real impressive. Metal stake, metal. But I thought, how am I going to look in the metro if I come with this? A drug is a very simple cart. A drug is basically a roller with a little bit of a wheel bearing around it, so that you can roll it, and it's like the predecessor of an actual wheel bearing. Okay, a drug is a little mini cart. You split wood. How? How do you split wood? With wedges. With wedges. Okay, you take a hammer. Typically, it would be called a maul. And a maul is basically your heavy sledgehammer. You can even use a smaller log and bash the heck out of it. I have done that. My friend lives in Fairfax Station, which is more forested than my home in Alexandria. And when I visited the last time, there was a tree across the road. And I said, actually, I came to do woodworking with you, Saturday, 10 in the morning. There's a tree in front of your driveway. And he said, oh, I guess we'll put it away, because fire department is going to take a day to show up in his neck of the woods. So we got out his woodworking tools, and I hate to admit it, he used the chainsaw, but okay. So how do you split a piece of wood? You use wedges. The best is hardwood wedges. They are called gluts. Okay, gluts are just big sharpened logs, right? You sharpen them with your axe. and then you have a wooden wedge, and if it's hardwood, it's plenty fine to split a few logs, and then you throw them in your campfire and you make new ones. Metal wedges, way too fancy. We don't need metal for that. We can use wooden wedges. A spike dog, there's a picture right in the middle. A spike dog is just a piece of metal with two sharp ends, like a giant staple. And a spike dog is to prevent the log rolling away while you work it, so you attach it to another log at 90 degrees. Make sense? It's the world's first staple, only not for paper. Snap line is down here on the left. A snap line is a piece of string that you rub with chalk. You hold really tight, we pull it, and somebody goes in the middle, pulls it up, lets it go snap, and you have a chalk line like scored onto the wood as cleanly as possible, okay? And then that's not a typo. An adze is the other kind of axe, right? I have no idea what this is in German. I think this is two very different words because I would notice that, axe, adze, what are they talking about? Are they stuttering? No, an axe has the blade like this, and adze has the blade like this, okay? They are very different tools. An axe is sort of your multi-purpose tool, and adze is to flatten a surface once you have felled the tree with your axe, okay? If you only take one tool in the zombie apocalypse, I would recommend you take an axe. It's the most versatile tool of all. You can make all the other tools if you have an axe, okay? Lorenzo, this is for you. I didn't know you were here, so good that we have you. There's all sorts of tools that you find downstairs. Chisels, everybody know what a chisel is. Mallets. Mallets are wooden hammers because you don't want to damage your metal tools with it, right? So you have a heavy bashing implement called a mallet. Saws, you have, if you go fancy, you have rip saws, which go lengthwise or across? Lengthwise with the grain. Rip saws are basically, if you look at a rip saw, it's a row of very small chisels in a long row, so you cut a groove along with the grain. And then you have crosscut saws, which is like little daggers that slice across the grain. If in doubt, either kind of saw will work in an emergency, but it's better to have a dedicated rip saw for working long and another crosscut saw for working across the grain, if you can afford it. Planes, there's all sorts of planes to smoothen wood. They come in different lengths. They come in long, medium, and short. That's all woodworking 101. I'm not going to go into that. Drills are fun and drills are interesting. Drills are basically spirally sharpened piece of metal that your blacksmith would have made, and they came in the in the varieties of being augers, right? Like this, you crank them and drill that. It's down at the top, at the bottom left. Or they come in as spoon bits. The oldest drills were actually not even that. They were just a sharpened spoon-shaped implement that literally cut itself like this into the wooden surface. Spoon bits. They are not common unless you go to antique stores nowadays. By the way, this was all fun. I looked at some French carpentry sources, and all these images are for French carpentry sources. So if you want to look at the original names for them, you will get my slides after this show. Presentation, not show, presentation. Hatchet is just a small carry-around axe that you use to sort of shape smaller pieces of wood. You can actually hatchet to a line. My woodworking buddy did that when we were trying to make blanks for his chair building. He has actually built a chair out of a red oak that fell on his property. He has built a chair out of it, okay? And used a hatchet for shaping things so that they're, blanks about what, 2 inches diameter, 30 inches long, and then you can go to town with your chair making. Draw knife is what it sounds like. A lathe is a turning tool that, in the interest of time, we don't have time to get into. But if you want anything that is cylindrical and very carefully shaped, the only thing that comes to mind for this is the interior of rope pulleys. You have that spinning disc that over which the rope actually goes. You would turn that on a lathe, and you would choose a wood that is very fine-grained and very interlocking grained. Apparently, elm is a very good wood for that because it doesn't have any plane in which it easily splits. Okay. Rasp is your giant finger nail file, right? Rasp is just that. And then gauges are a fancified version of an awl. I told you an awl is just a marking scratch implement. A gauge is basically an awl with a measurement stick attached to it so that you can, say, scratch a line parallel to a normal edge in a specific distance. So this is all woodworking. So let's look at timber joints. I'm not going to go into the details, but you can enjoy the pictures here. I gave you some of those words here. Basically, when you connect, this is all joinery. And joinery is at the intersection of two families of crafts. On the small side is cabinet making and furniture making. That's all joinery, but you want to put together pieces of bone lumber that are basically this size, right? On the upside for your cathedral project is carpentry. Both of them use joinery, they just use them at a different order of magnitude, from this big to this big. Okay? So the simplest joint is this. This is a half lap joint, right? You make both pieces of wood half as thick and you put them together, and then you put a peg through there. And you see this in the top left picture. You can have a bridle joint, which is basically you have them 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, like this, and you slot one piece in an open groove in another piece. You can have mortise and tenon, which is the most common one, where you have an actual slot, and it can be a through mortise or a closed mortise, where you slot a tongue into the mortise, the tenon into the mortise, right? You can have the through tenon. Do we see that anywhere there? No. A tusk tenon is having a peg on the far side to prevent it from sliding out again. Okay? And I always think of mammoth's tusk tenon. That sounds, this is like you put a mammoth tooth through, but it's actually just a peg that prevents it from sliding out again. Kind of looks rustic. If you want to go instant, Game of Thrones look, use tusk tenons. Totally a thing. Okay. And then the epitome of craftsmanship came when people developed, and this was French carpentry, and this is actually probably one of the few things that were original to the early medieval period, and they were probably invented in France, and that was the Treadle du Jupiter. And that is the scarf joint, and that is the most highest developed wood connection ever made in the Western Hemisphere. I say Western Hemisphere because Japanese woodworking blows our minds collectively. If you look at Japanese woodworking, they do this on steroids, okay? The Treadle du Jupiter, or the scarf joint on the bottom, is two pieces of wood that are connected in a way that they can take tension, compression, and torsion, and all of this through this interlocking shape, which you lock together by knocking that central wedge through sideways. That is real ingenuity. Okay, but we want to talk practically about how to build a truss, and a truss is heavy pieces of timber, so how do we get this thing up? Well, first of all, you need some rope. How do you make rope? You take fibers. It's either typically flax or hemp. Those are fibers. They are spun on a rope walk after they are beaten on a tool that looks like sort of a weird lawn chair where you smash the fibers, get the fibers out of the plant. It's called a flax brake. They have that at every farm museum that you ever visit, okay? Flax brake is giving you the fiber, and then you can make either linen for your shirts or ropes for your cathedrals, okay? And I have seen one application in a video that I will give you a link to later on. Rope is not just for lifting stuff. You can also have thick braided knots of ropes as cushions, okay? Think where we now would use cushions or styrofoam packaging blocks. They use rope cushions as a, for instance, if you have a very finely carved statue from the stonemason that you want to bring on an ox cart from the stonemason's shed to the cathedral without damaging and chipping, you put that on and in between rope cushions that are just thick braided knots of rope. Okay, thought that was an interesting thing. What's a windlass? A windlass is the thing on the top left. A windlass is a very clever way to amplify your force to pull pieces of wood together when your arms don't reach far enough or when you're not strong enough. A windlass is you're twisting a rope loop that you loop around both things, and then you twist it really hard, and it pulls it together. That's a windlass. Okay. Of course, we have block and tackle. That's your basic pulley systems, and you see that on the top right. That has been around since ancient Roman times. Anybody who's ever sailed, ancient mariners were just as familiar with pulleys as we are nowadays. That's again an ancient invention, rope and block and tackle systems. And then you have this thing. This is also a very nautical thing. The capstan there, sometimes called crab. And dead man, I had to look up what is a dead man. A dead man is actually this thing here, which is just a log that you throw in a pit in the soil, put your rope around it, put soil on top of it, and use it as an anchor, as a counterweight, so that you can pull against it. Okay, that's a dead man. Sometimes you need that sort of as a buried anchor counterweight. This is all very maritime as winches and whatnot. Here is for you. You have looked interested when I talked about the aqueducts later. When they build aqueducts, there's fantastic photos all over the internet on how you build an aqueduct. None of them are very accurate because they all show different phases in the same photo. This is the other big insight that I had. They wouldn't have done a whole lot of different operations at the same time. You see how on the left it's all finished, and on the right they have basically nothing, and then they have stonemasons here and a crane over there. In reality, this would have been all much slower, and they would have done it in stages gradually. They wouldn't have done everything at the same time. These images are always very, very condensed to show everything in one image. Okay? But here's what I realized ancient people had. They had water mills, okay? Because that's how they had their bread. They had ports, of course, with all the ships and all the equipment that came with it. They had treadle wheels. Treadle wheels is your human-sized hamster cage to winch up things, and that's how you build a crane. A crane is basically a derrick. You see a derrick arrangement, there it is. You see two types of derrick arrangement, and the ancient Greeks basically named them on how many pulley slings they went around, and they had like a, I guess like a dual pastos and a tripastos and an entipastos. The Greeks classified different derricks into how much amplification or force it does through the pulley system. But you see there all this A-frame derrick arrangement, and where they used the winch, they would also use the hamster wheel or treadle wheel for humans to walk around. How do you attach heavy stuff when you lift it? This is more for masonry than for lumber, but I found the pictures so cool that I wanted to put them in there. First of all, they were smart. They knew that things have a center of gravity, and how can we prove that? On the top there in that photo, you see all the stones have little belly buttons. You see the belly buttons on the stones in the aqueducts? That is their center of gravity, because what? When you put your crane hook there, you attach it with the tongs from the sides, they will rotate easily freely, and when you put them in place, the stonemason can just easily rotate them. And in some cases, they will make it just above the center of gravity, guess what, because they're smart, so that the stone naturally turns into the orientation in which you want to set it. Aha. Saves labor, that's all what the people were about. You see, I mentioned the tongs down there on the bottom. You have the tongs that you use. They basically just clamp things, and through the weight, you can imagine that, right? You pull up, the thing clamps tight. You still use this to this day. On the top is something that I had never seen before, but it's really clever. How come you don't see any of the holes in the marble on temples? Well, they actually used an internal lifting hook, and that internal lifting hook was called a holivella, sorry Greek speakers, which is rather an internal shackle. How do you do that? You have two wedges and a straight piece, and the whole thing you put in a tapered hole that flares out inside the stone, and when you lift it, it just wedges itself in the stone. Does that make sense, Tanya?
I'm trying to imagine how.
So you put in the two wedges first, then you put in the centerpiece, okay? And then you put a bolt through all three of them, and then the wedges prevent it slipping out, and the centerpiece and the three are all now one, because you put a bolt through them and you attach it to the frame.
You put them in.
Yes, you put them in separately. You see the top rightmost thing, that's a really small picture there. They come apart. You can carry them in a pocket, like the size of my wallet, but you can lift a 1 or 2 ton block with that sort of thing. Good. Now, how do we know a lot of this? We know a lot of that thanks to a few authors. Shout out to, oh God, I misspelled him. I'm sorry. Vitruvius. Marcus Vitruvius Pollio, I will totally fix that before I give you the slides, whose book I guess you can get in the university bookstore and library. It's still read, you know, on architecture. And he had a very interesting quote that I'm just going to let up there for 10 seconds on what he thinks architects should be. That's for you guys. Well, I include myself because civil engineering is just, you know, a spin-off from architecture later on, right? By the way, he used architects, not as architects, he used architects as builders, and that includes civil engineers, because he said, and he didn't write this I don't know if he wrote in Latin or Greek, but he would have said architectos, okay? So, case study 1, Köln in Germany along the Rhine. This is a extremely large two-tower cathedral in Germany, in Western Germany. And it was begun in 1248. Design is in the high Gothic style. It is fairly late in the Gothic game as things go. They started this at 1100, and so when the Gothic style began. So this is sort of late on the block. And Cologne is awesome because, essentially speaking, after 300 years of building on this cathedral, they ran out of money. And the thing sat unfinished for another 300 years until 1842. What happened in the 1840s? Germany had a major surge. All the German states, duchies, principalities, started to have some initial unification efforts. Reunification was doing that time. What they did is they actually said, as a symbol of the German nation coming together, let's have a national lottery. Everybody in the German Empire pitched in, and they managed to finish this in 1880. In just 40 years, they built about as much as the medieval people had created to put this together, and it's now there. One thing that I do in this is the second PowerPoint in all my lecturing that I do. Other PowerPoint is just about the Cathedral of Cologne, and it's a presentation called 800 Years of Construction Management, right? Because I teach construction management, and it's all about the details of this one here. But basically, in that presentation, I say a construction site for a cathedral is eternal, because the cathedral is eternal. The cathedral, by the time you're done, well, in this case, 700 years or more, 750 years. No, did I get it right? No, I can't do my math for today. 650, you do your math, okay? However long it took to build the Dome of Cologne, by the time you're done, the parts that are over 600 years old need some maintenance and refurbishment, right? And then in the mid-1940s, you had World War II. So the Dombauhütte, which is German for the dome building hut, which is the construction field office for the dome. They closed it for 30 years, and then they reopened it in 1907, and it's been ongoing. There's a field construction office for the Dome of Cologne, and it's never finished because it's never finished all at the same time, and you would have to do maintenance anyway the moment it's finished, so it's an ongoing eternal maintenance project. And they employ a bunch of specialists to keep it done. Here you see the original plan on the left, and the finished plan on the right. Some changes in the buttresses, mostly doing the fewer, bigger ones, but it's remarkable clean in the style. And what I like about that, it epitomizes what cathedrals are all about. Cathedrals were the absolute centers of a town, of a community. If you arrive by Cologne, make sure you come by train. The train will go across the bridge of the Rhine, which is off to the right of the photo. It will pull in the train station, which is just on the right of the photo. You see the train station hall there? You come out and you look up, and mind blown, there is this 500-foot tall, 500-foot long, 650 years in the making cathedral right next to the train station. And that's how European cities all used to, or most used to feel like when you arrive. The thing that I like best about the Dome of Cologne is that you have a crane that has a glorious history and has become a symbol of Cologne in its own right, because guess what? when they stopped in 1500 whatever, they left the crane sitting on top. And the legend of Cologne is that this crane, this is a model, and this guy is apparently an enthusiast of that crane who reconstructed a model for the museum next to, you see the cathedral in the background, right? And this crane sat there from 1560 to 1840, and 300 years worth of generations of children in Cologne were falling asleep to the gently creaking noise of the medieval crane on top of it. That's the legend. This is the cool human stuff that you can't even make up. When it was dismantled, so I think they tried to use it. They tried to use it in 1840 because why not? It still stood there, and they found parts of it were rather rocky. So I think they used it for one ceremonial block, and then they, built improvements and strengthened it and reused it to finish parts of it, and then they eventually had to get some newer crane built. Not sure if still lumber or already steel, but the cool thing is that crane still exists in numerous private and museum collections because they took all the lumber and carved it into pipes, chairs, religious souvenirs, and other assorted stuff that they could give to whoever donated major amounts to the lottery in Cologne. But I digress. Here's just views because I got so sucked into this is totally deep dive into the internet. Every single view of Cologne from the Middle Ages to the Industrial Age has, you see the crane? All I want you to see is look at every picture and look at that crane. This is the most well-documented medieval crane on Earth because every view of Cologne for 300 some years showed it. And there you see the real thing. These are photos from the construction. There it is on top of, I think it was, I don't know which, it's East or West Tower. And this one here, you see it has this distinctive bell-shaped thing, but on top it's basically just an enclosed derrick yet all again. We've seen that. Now, I wanted to give a shout out. This presentation would not be correct without mentioning the words Leonardo da Vinci, right? I know you've all been waiting. When is Leonardo da Vinci mentioned, right? Because that guy was like, oh my goodness, if he could draw yet another kind of weird crane thing in his notes in between painting Mona Lisas and such, he would do it. But I wanted to put in perspective. Leonardo da Vinci, total copycat. He just came up with crazy variations on things. Here, Notre Dame, 1163 to 1348, 1345. Dome of Cologne, a little bit later because Germans had to catch up on the Gothic game. Leonardo da Vinci, he lived from 1452 to 1519. He just made fancy variations which were by most accounts more fanciful than practical, right? Because why reinvent the wheel with all sorts of bells and whistles? I also want to give out a shout to a person that you may never have heard of, but you should, because it's relevant to what we're doing, and that is a retired concrete mixed truck operator in Upper Michigan by the name of Wally Wallington. And I bought Wally Wallington's DVD from Wally Wallington's webpage. And here's why. Wally Wallington has an obsession. He delivered concrete, and what is concrete? Concrete is artificial rock. It comes in, sludge-like form when you bring it in your truck, and it hardens, and you make things out of it. While Wally Wallington got obsessed with let's build himself his own Stonehenge, right? By himself. And that doesn't mean he builds a big wooden formwork and then puts concrete inside. No. He builds a form on the ground, and then he figured, I kid you not, this is full true stuff, and you see the photos. He figured out ways with levers, with counterweights, with fulcrums to build and move Stonehenge-sized pieces of stone by him very own one-person self. And that, I think, deserves mention, okay? So if anybody ever says you can't move that cathedral timber there, tell them to tell Wally to not give up, okay? So, second case study. How are we doing on time? I'm running way over, right?
Okay,
I'm running way over.
there's just something in the chat.
Question in the chat. Oh, I should have looked at the chat.
That's okay. It's hard to hear when you walk away, but we're gonna.
Yeah. sort of on the other side of the screen. Anyway, second case study, Guédelon. Where is Guédelon, or what is Guédelon, or why is Guédelon? Well, first of all, I've been to Guédelon, so I love Guédelon. Total awesome place. You want to visit one place in France that not Paris? Go to Guédelon. Where is Guédelon? Guédelon is in the forest of Burgundy in an old quarry that was long overgrown with forest in the middle of nowhere. Like, you will find 3 bed and breakfasts like in 10-mile radius, and that's pretty much it. It has become the largest tourist attraction outside of Paris and I think Versailles in France, because there was a castle owner. You know, French people, they have so many castles. There's private people who own smaller castles who was reasonably successful. And he was maintaining his castle and did pretty well and was sort of interested. And some 30 years ago, this guy said to himself, why don't I build a new one and figure out how they did it? Experimental archaeology. So he literally convinced his town building permit review board to say, we're going to build a castle, medieval French castle. Imagine design, all authentic style, all authentic dimensions, all authentic tools, except for hard hats hidden under linen caps. And that is the only concession to modern life. And I think they wear safety belts when they are on scaffolds, but that you can hide under your tunic. And this is the design. Let's look at this. This is Guédelon. I didn't take these photos by my photos were a few years before them. These are more recent. So they have the crane. We now recognize the treadle wheel crane, ancient technology. They have a beautiful treadle wheel crane that they use. And there's a wonderful, wonderful 3 or 4 episode, full hour-long BBC documentary, How to Build a Castle, with British historians Ruth and Peter and Marcus. And these are British historians that went to France and they lived there for an entire summer and were part of the workforce and documented it. Funnest video I've ever seen about how to build, I guess, well, a castle. It's close to a cathedral, right? Close to a cathedral. And so here's the episodes, and I have done, I have done total reminiscence. I kind of got so sucked into it, I had to rewatch the whole thing, and I wrote down, if you want to see specific technologies, you go to this episode those times, and you see just that thing. But it's all over the place. It basically tells you, well, it's like how to build a truss. That thing tells you how to build a whole castle, and it's 3 hours of it. It's brilliant. Okay? I need to talk about trusses because I'm talking way too much, but I'm having fun. I hope you do too. If you have pieces of timber for your truss, now you want to make sure this is not becoming the world's worst Lego puzzle, right? Especially one of your own making. So the French carpenters have a very elaborate system, but any system works of marking, matching joints with the same number. Now the number could even be a little code as in what part of the building it's for, but as long as you chisel in, you scratch your one, and these are all Roman numbers because chisel tips are straight, right? So you use Roman numbers and you carve in, just put it down, bash it with your mallet there, mark next story. And then you dry fit it in this system. There's actually this whole insane detailed thing that tells you if you want to go the full French style of French carpentry, like the compagnons, this is the system that they use, but my French isn't good enough to actually decipher that, but it looked cool. So, in conclusion, building a truss in a cathedral is all eminently possible. Sure, it takes a lot of work. With very little exception, none of this was new technology. This was ancient technology that Romans and to some extent Greek and Egyptians also used. All of that uses a lot of human labor, but more so it uses a lot of ingenuity, it uses a lot of clever devices with the simplest of tools, whether it's an axe or a piece of string or Plumb Bob or a marking knife. And all you need to think about is you need to assemble it in your mind first, then lay it out on your tracing floor, then you do dry fitting, and then you use your pulleys and capstans and whatnot, and do this kind of thing. But in short, how you build a truss? Well, like they've done for the last thousands of years. Okay. Questions? Yes.
So as far as like the sequence of building a cathedral, I guess, to you.
Yeah, so from
Oh, yeah.
people on won't be able to give you. There's actually two.
Okay. Okay. So as far as the sequence of building a cathedral, I mean, I guess from the point of view of like construction management, it's like 500 years. As far as the different guilds goes, would the carpenters be engaged throughout the entirety of the process?
They would be engaged somewhat at the early stages when you have basically everything that goes up to the roof edge. Why? Because they needed to build ramps for the excavation. They needed to build scaffolds for the walls. And as the walls were going up, they needed the cranes. The high time of carpenters clearly came when they did the roof truss building. And if you look at the history of Guédelon in the last, this has been going on for over 20 years, and it's going another 10 years. So you can visit it and see it in person. They had different intensity of these. The one that was always there was the blacksmith, because blacksmith makes all the tools, and it all starts with the blacksmith. You need to have a whole lot of laborers just to move things around. You have a few skilled ones. The stonemasons are the most skilled. I would say the carpenters are the most ingenious because they have to move things. The stonemason just thinks about a piece this big that they can, shape cleverly. But I would say the carpenters, they grow up in intensity, sort of low intensity for the first 2/3 until you get to the roof edge, and then the roof. This is all carpentry. By the way, I looked and I looked and I looked, and I'm very, very sure I just couldn't identify. I fast forwarded through the Guédelon videos many times. There was a thing in the Guédelon video where they actually said we have about a dozen of these Guédelon trusses that look like this, only a bit smaller. And what I think they did is they lifted them all up on one side of the Great Hall, assembled them, and then installed the ridge beam, and then they used the ridge beam to slide them around over the Great Hall, sort of like curtain hooks on a curtain, and put them in place to prevent these large triangles from collapsing, because if nothing holds them on the top, that's a huge problem. I don't know how they would do that in how you would erect multiple trusses next to each other. I focused on how you do a single truss, but Guédelon has a solution, and that's the ridge beam that was installed before any trusses to keep them from toppling over.
And in a medieval context like Notre Dame, would the same carpenters that were assembling these trusses be doing some of the finished work as far as the doors or the windows, like the
doors? Yes. Window shutters? Yes. In Guédelon, it's all the same carpenters. That's totally within their field of. So timber framing, doors, window shutters, and assorted things. Yes. You may not need such an experienced carpenter to build your scaffold. And you definitely would want to have very experienced wood carvers for inside finishes like statuary and paneling and stuff. Yeah. Questions in the chat?
Yeah, so there's a question in the chat about how they got the crane on the top of the building in Cologne. And
Yes.
did they use a pulley system or did they construct
Yes.
it?
So you're asking how you build a crane without a crane is the actual question. The answer is very simple. In pieces. You use the individual pieces, and each part of the crane cannot be larger than what your largest pulley can lift. And then, just like the truss yourself, you figure, because the crane is itself just a truss structure, well, mostly a derrick, and you figure out how to assemble it on the ground, maybe test assemble the crane, take it in pieces in the right order, put them up, make sure they're all stable, brace them a bit, and assemble it like you would the Lathe truss, only then you have the ability to move heavier pieces. And I do not know if they want to lift the entire trusses. My guess is that would exceed even a medieval monster treadle crane's capacity. My guess is they would take these pieces here and take sub-assemblies of them, lift them up, and then put them together in a sequence that sort of notches and slots together.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
No, there might be more, but what do you think the biggest difference between sort of medieval construction management and today's construction management would be?
We think We think we're smarter. No, I'm serious. I'm serious. This one here is one of these eye-opening deep dives that told us these were the same kind of people. They have the same brain, the same experience and skills that they could acquire, and the same emotions and ambitions that we have. They did not have electricity and more recently computers. And other than that, they had a lot more open mind for past precedent of experience that was passed on. So I would think, at least in construction management, we have a couple of the usual suspects. We overly rely on scheduling computer tools, like it's the end of the world, and most of them is never quite accurate, and the assumptions are never quite precise, and it's all sort of wishful thinking. I think we get too much carried away in theoretical planning that is not informed by doability. The word that we use in my field is called constructability. It's meaning design to be built. And that hasn't gotten better since our profession separated, because you're the design folks, we're the building folks, and design to be built is somewhere falling through the cracks in the middle. So I think they had a strategic advantage. They designed what they built themselves, and if it didn't work, they adjusted it. We get plans from one handed to the next one, get inspected here, modified there, and then we have to build it somehow. And yes, construction companies, they have tower cranes, they have hydraulic jacks and all of these things nowadays, but they figured out solutions for everything they needed to do with prehistoric, well, not prehistoric, this is written history, but pre-industrial tools that worked just as well, took a little bit longer, needed a bit more care, weren't as elegant, but I think we're too smart nowadays. I think we think we are too smart nowadays.
Are there any other questions? Do you have a question?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yes, please.
I don't have a question.
Okay.
Well, I'll give you a shopping list.
Yes, yeah,
Okay, so thank you, super. This was awesome, really great lecture / show.
Next time I'll write up my text to be all over the place.
Was
but I
it
think
really
it's fun
great?
like this.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn off the webinar now and. Oh, from here. Okay, sorry. I have to turn it off from here somehow. All right, bye, everyone.